is set, the clock is ticking, and the pieces are heavy, carved from pure effort. We move a white pawn, hit the timer, and wait in the harsh light of the match. The wood is polished. The lines are perfectly drawn. We study the angles, calculating the risks, anticipating a brilliant counterattack that never comes. The opponent does not move. So we reach across the table, grab a black knight, and move it for them. We hit the timer again. We are frantic, orchestrating both sides of the board, driving the momentum, desperate to keep the game alive. But the chair across the table has been empty the entire time. This is not a relationship. It is an asymmetrical labor of animation. This labor carries a precise expected value. When we initiate contact, we are casting a signal across the board, anticipating a matching frequency in return. Consider a perfectly unremarkable evening. The room is quiet. A phone rests on a desk. A carefully calibrated three-line message sits delivered. The tone was meticulously engineered to be engaging but not desperate, light but substantial. The laundry is folding itself. The tea is getting cold, and 30 seconds pass. A typing bubble appears, hovers, and vanishes, replaced eventually by a lowercase, one-word reply. The physical sensation is a sudden drop in temperature, a tectonic ache just beneath the collarbone, a realization of decay. What happens to the energy that is offered across the board but never caught? We will return to where that energy goes, because the destination is not what most assume. First, we must look at the mechanics of the friction. We convince ourselves that the silence is just a temporary delay, or perhaps a rigorous test of our own emotional endurance. We pour our highest frequency into an absolute vacuum, hoping the returning echo will eventually sound like a human voice. The reality of the board, however, is much colder. A concept in behavioral economics maps perfectly onto this quiet devastation. The observation involves a reward prediction error. When an organism exerts high-effort energy and receives a low-effort return, the mind often registers a catastrophic deficit. Research in this specific area indicates that the body can respond with a chemical alarm, signaling a terrible investment. Over time, the pathways adapt. The mind begins to view the act of reaching out not as an opportunity for connection, but as a high-risk hazard. It initiates a biological freeze response to prevent further depletion. This dynamic sheds light on a specific exhaustion. It is not the tiredness of a long day. It is the deep geological fatigue of pouring high-value currency into an absolute void. The pattern was built by circumstances, yet it is maintained by habit, and habits can be examined when we are ready to look at them. We are, objectively, agonizing over glowing pixels on a glass screen, which seems slightly ridiculous, yet the erosion is entirely real. A delayed response across the table chips away at the bedrock of self-worth. Every unanswered move makes the pieces feel heavier. How long will the echo last before the room goes completely dead? Society often labels this withdrawal as manipulative. They call it ghosting. But ghosting is flipping the board and leaving the room with malicious intent. Ceasing to initiate is something else entirely. It is placing the dynamic into Zugzwang. In game theory, Zugzwang is a state where the opponent is finally obligated to make a move, and any move they make will reveal their true position. Grandmasters use this to trap an opponent in their own inertia. It is a position where the obligation to move becomes a fatal vulnerability. By refusing to initiate, we are not punishing them. We are simply handing them the clock. We are forcing them to demonstrate whether they are an active participant in this match, or merely a passive consumer of our energy. The boundary is passive. It is a silent, acoustic test of resonance. We keep reaching across the table because we are terrified that if we stop moving their pieces, the game ends. For most people carrying this weight, this tends to be the core anxiety of the asymmetrical dynamic. The underlying current is not about preserving the connection. We are protecting a story, a narrative where we are valued enough to be pursued. The psychological pivot reveals a brutal reality. If the communication dies the exact second we stop initiating, relationship was a phantom. We were doing 100% of the labor to animate a lifeless dynamic. The realization hits like a tectonic shift beneath the board. We did not lose a partner. We lost the illusion of a partner that we were projecting into an empty chair. The grief is not for them, but for the nights spent analyzing low-effort replies, trying to extract meaning from a void. We were translating silence into a language we could tolerate, just to avoid facing the absolute zero of their indifference. We have spent months, perhaps years, acting as the sole creator of a dynamic that connects to nowhere. And then the realization settles. The sky does not fall. We just sit in the quiet and the dissonance fades. I wonder if we learned to carry the conversation because early environments taught us that connection required overfunctioning. We might have learned that silence was dangerous, a precursor to abandonment. A child reads the room, adjusts the emotional thermostat, and moves the pieces for adults who refuse to play. That was an intelligent response to a scarce landscape, and that version of us was protecting something real. But the landscape changed. The people who are close to us now are not those people. The habit remains because we have never asked the pattern to check its surroundings. The environment is not here anymore. We are, and part of us already knows the difference between then and now. That knowing is where movement starts. The math changes here. Trace the silence backward and listen to the gap. The friction originates elsewhere. It is time to hit the timer and walk away from the table. We no longer need to sacrifice elite emotional currency for worthless tokens. If a specific name surfaced while watching this, another individual carrying a dynamic entirely alone, passing this video along might offer them the exact quiet acknowledgement they need. They will understand the silence. This is not a cruel abandonment. It is the ultimate, dignified resignation. We are reclaiming our capacity, refusing to let our resonance be swallowed by a vacuum. We are choosing the dignity of an empty room over the humiliation of an empty chair. The undertow of this long-standing habit does not vanish overnight, not because we fail to understand the math now, but because understanding the void and resting peacefully within it operate on two entirely different frequencies. The muscle memory of reaching across the table is incredibly strong, but I keep wondering, what would it feel like to reserve that profound resonance for someone who actually brings their own pieces to the board? What would it look like to sit across from a